The word good person seems simple. It sounds like the ideal everyone is encouraged to strive for. It's praised in school textbooks, promoted in moral education, and honored as a kind of spiritual medal across cultures. No one teaches us to ever question the value of becoming a good person. And precisely because no one asks, it slips into our minds as a default definition, so default that we don't even see it as a definition anymore. It becomes an invisible framework where our behavior is measured not by inner honesty, but by social standards. And then, the ego, clever and endlessly adaptive, learns how to play the role of the good person. Why? To be liked, praised, and protected. At that point, being good is no longer a journey of living truthfully, but a survival strategy. Some people become gentle, kind, easy to talk to, always willing to give in, not necessarily because they truly wish to love others, but because they want to protect an image of being virtuous. Some people never get angry, never oppose, never offend anyone, not because they are deeply at peace, but because they are terrified of losing their place in the eyes of others. From there, a moral mask begins to form layer upon layer, with every compliment, every approving glance, every expectation of society. The danger is this: a performance repeated long enough becomes part of one's personality. And once the ego fully identifies with the role of being the good person, any behavior that doesn't fit that image will cause guilt and shame. They no longer know what is truly themselves and what has been programmed into them by the fear of judgment. Such good people are not living by natural morality. They are living inside the framework of social morality, with an ego carefully painted to fit every expectation. And in trying so hard to meet the standard of being good, they lose the most genuine quality of all: honesty with themselves. Which is why we need to ask again, is being a good person truly the expression of awareness, or is it just a clever performance under the spotlight of social morality? Because long before the idea of being good became a life goal, it was already planted in our minds as a desirable image. Since childhood, we were praised for obeying, for giving in, for speaking politely, for sacrificing our own wishes for the sake of others. But here's the detail often overlooked: those behaviors were always tied to a reward, a satisfied look, a word of praise, good child, or simply the feeling of safety when accepted by the group. In this way, being good was never truly a natural state. It was a conditioned pattern. Its formation mostly served the needs of social organization and control. Because for any community to remain stable, it must encourage behaviors that maintain order. Whether or not those standards align with human nature is secondary. As long as the system runs smoothly, that's what matters. So good people become representatives of an ideal type of citizen: obedient, non-resistant, easy to lead, and quick to blend in. In religious or traditional education, this concept was even magnified into an absolute moral ideal. A good person is someone who does the right thing, even when no one is watching. Someone who forgives, who endures, who loves unconditionally. But here lies the paradox. When such standards are imposed as moral obligations, they often turn into forms of inner repression. People are forced to smile when they want to cry, to stay silent when they want to scream, to remain kind even when filled with hurt and resistance. The concept of the good person is not neutral. It isn't just a description of behavior, it carries within it a whole system of values, a standard of judgment, and above all, a mechanism of control. Because when someone fails to match that image, they feel guilty, they feel bad, they feel in need of correction. Thus, the idea of being good is not just a noble goal. It is also an invisible tool that makes people self-monitor and self-correct, not from wisdom, but from fear of being excluded from the group. And here's something worth noting. The idea of a good person differs across cultures, religions, and systems. That alone shows us something very clear. Good is not a universal truth. It is only a product of social conditioning. And if something is a product of conditioning, it cannot be truth. It is just a role, encouraged to maintain the structure of society. Which is why, instead of asking, how do I become a good person? Perhaps the deeper question is, am I living true to myself, or am I only trying to fit into an image set by others? That question is uncomfortable, but it is the beginning of a life no longer manipulated by the performance of social morality, and instead guided by a deeper kind of wisdom. A wisdom born from direct seeing and from honesty with oneself. First of all, we need to acknowledge, the ego does not want to disappear. That is the most basic principle of its structure. And in order not to disappear, it must adapt by any means possible, even by becoming a good person. When the ego realizes that, In a society that prizes morality and kindness, the respected ones are the tolerant, the compassionate, the appropriately virtuous. It does not take long for the ego to learn how to display exactly those qualities, not out of love, but out of survival. People often overlook this. Many so-called moral actions don't actually arise from wisdom or genuine compassion, but from an unconscious mechanism designed to protect the self-image. A person who never gets angry may not actually be at peace. They may simply be afraid of being judged as hot-tempered. A person who always gives way may not truly be humble. They might just be afraid of upsetting others. A person who always speaks kindly may not necessarily be loving. They may only be running on an ego that knows how to calculate. The ego is an excellent actor. It observes, imitates, rehearses, and slowly becomes skilled. It knows when to smile, when to stay silent, when to show just the right amount of tolerance to be recognized as deep. Over time, these behaviors become so smooth, so natural, that even the person themselves believes they are truly virtuous. But in reality, much of it is only survival skills of an ego that has learned how to disguise itself with morality. And so, the performance of being a good person stops being just a social image. It becomes an identity. Someone starts to see themselves as the embodiment of what is right, of what is proper, of what is integrity. And as an inevitable consequence, they begin to hide the parts of themselves that are not so good, the unwholesome emotions, the selfish thoughts, the deep personal cravings. They dare not look at those darker sides, not because they don't exist, but because they clash with the image they've been building for too long. The danger here is this: when we deceive ourselves long enough, the false begins to look like the real. And when a role is sustained with enough discipline, the line between being good and playing good disappears. At that point, the ego has achieved the perfect victory, not through blatant force, but through a smooth transformation into the very image society loves most. But the sad truth is, living this way does not bring freedom. It keeps people constantly cautious, always adjusting, endlessly maintaining control in order to preserve their image. They cannot get angry honestly. They cannot speak directly. They cannot live as they truly are. Every word, every action passes through a filter. And so, no matter how beautiful it may look on the outside, such a person lives with deep inner tension. Because they are not living from truth, they are living to protect an illusion. The ego does not fear being wrong. The ego only fears being exposed, which is why, when it wears the mask of the good person, it does not hesitate to abandon authenticity so long as the flawless image is intact. But what the ego does not see, or does not want to admit, is this: the more perfect the mask, the more suffocated the life within. And the longer one stays inside the performance, the fainter the possibility of returning to one's true self. Many people carry this image of the good person like a shield of safety just to survive in the group. They always appear agreeable, avoid conflict, give in, even when their hearts are full of disagreement. Not because they are truly tolerant or blind to problems, but because they are afraid of what might happen if they stop playing the role. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being criticized. They fear being the difficult one. They fear being pushed out of the circle of people who currently love them. And because of that fear, they betray themselves. Slowly, they learn to ignore their real feelings in order to keep the peace. They suppress anger. They hide pain. They smile when they should have stayed silent. In close relationships, they are often the understanding one, the accommodating one, the one who doesn't make a fuss. But if you listen closely, inside, you will hear a quiet tension, a place where truth has been strangled, where the inner voice has been drowned, all in order to protect what looks like a noble role. And here lies the cost. Pain that is never acknowledged cannot be healed, and feelings that are consistently denied do not vanish. They build up, they sink into the depths of the mind. And silently, they begin to break a person from within. This is why so many kind-hearted people fall into depression, into burnout, or into deep inner collapse. It's not that such people are living wrongly. It's that they've gone too long without living truthfully. Kindness, when it does not walk together with honesty, becomes a subtle form of abandoning oneself. People often confuse empathy with the inability to say what they clearly see. They fear that speaking the truth will hurt others. But in reality, it is pretense that causes the deepest wounds over time. Silence that comes from fear, not from love, cannot create real connection. And if everyone only says what is pleasant to hear, then every relationship becomes nothing more than a stage where skillful roles are played, rather than a space that nurtures truth. The person who is always good is sometimes the very one who no longer allows themselves to be wrong, to be angry, to be weak, or to be still. They live as a moralized version of themselves not because that is who they are, but because that is how they are accepted. And when acceptance becomes more valuable than truth, people choose to quietly deceive themselves, gently, repeatedly, without noise drifting further and further from what is real. A life like this does not create freedom. It creates a subtle form of slavery. Slavery to image, slavery to expectation, slavery to conditioned kindness. That is the tragedy of so many good people. They dare not live true to themselves because they are afraid of losing the role that society applauds. But in that very act, they lose something far more precious, the wholeness of their inner being. A place where goodness does not need to be performed, and kindness is not an act, but the quiet nature of someone who no longer needs to be anybody at all. Which is why moral behavior, if not illuminated by wisdom, so easily collapses into mere formality. People may act correctly, but with the wrong motivation. A person can do something kind, but their real motive is to be praised, to be recognized, or to feel superior to others. In that case, the right thing is reduced to a strategy, not an expression of a compassionate heart. And if the right thing is only a disguise, then even the most beautiful actions may be nothing more than expressions of ego. When morality is taught without inner absorption, it becomes a tool of control. People learn to label actions. This is good, that is bad, without ever asking why. They apply morality like a ready-made formula. One must forgive, one must sacrifice, one must yield, but they never really connect with their genuine feelings or the specifics of the situation. At that point, morality is no longer nourishment for life, but a fence that blocks authentic living from being expressed. And on the level of society, this kind of morality without wisdom is easily exploited. It is used to create a standard image, where people are forced to live according to collective moral expectations, whether or not those expectations conflict with their true being. It creates good people who fit the standard, individuals who behave properly but lack depth. They may speak beautiful words, do the right things, but they are not truly present. They may forgive, yet carry hidden resentment. They may yield, yet never once have their hearts been heard. This is why, without wisdom that is, the capacity to see clearly the nature of the mind, to see clearly motives, to see clearly the operations of the ego morality does not liberate. On the contrary, it can reinforce bondage, dressed up in noble and righteous forms. People become proud of their kindness, but fail to see that this very pride keeps them locked inside an image they dare not break. Only when morality arises from inner wisdom, from deep understanding, from unconditional love, from a vision that goes beyond the ego, only then does moral behavior become truly liberating. It is no longer something one must strive to do or carefully maintain. It is the natural expression of a consciousness no longer ruled by fear, expectation, or the need to prove itself. And at that point, morality is no longer a tool. It becomes a living quality. Such a person lives authentically, without the need to be recognized as good. They do not define themselves by moral labels. They do not try to build a charming or likable image in the eyes of others. They are not concerned with what people think about them, because what matters is not praise from outside, but honesty from within. For such a person, action does not arise from the desire to be loved, nor from the fear of being criticized. They can be gentle, but not because they want to be called gentle. They can even offer something precious, but not because they need to prove anything. They speak when words are needed. They stay silent when silence is needed, not out of reaction, not out of habit, not out of role-playing, but out of a clear seeing of reality as it unfolds. That clarity doesn't come from reasoning or from ideals. It comes from a mind no longer governed by the personal ego. Such a person may act with kindness, but their kindness is not a strategy. It is the natural outcome of an inner life unclouded by greed, anger, or delusion. They don't have to force themselves to do the right thing, because within them there is no longer any drive to do the wrong thing. And when the mind is no longer driven by self-centered motives, then every action, whether a simple word or the smallest gesture, carries a healing power. Unlike the one who is merely acting as the good person, the one who lives authentically does not place their emphasis on behavior, but on truth. If truth needs to be spoken, they will speak it, even if it makes others uncomfortable. If truth needs silence, they will be silent, even if it means others misunderstand them. They do not sacrifice truth in exchange for harmony, but they also do not impose truth in order to show themselves. They simply live as a stream of honesty, no hiding, no decorating, no performing. And because of that, they rarely need others to call them good. They do not seek recognition, nor do they fear being misunderstood. They allow others to think as they will. And in that letting go, they are no longer trapped in the bonds of moral appearances or social standards. They are not good people, according to any standard. They are living, breathing humans, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, sometimes silent, sometimes expressive. But through it all, they are always real. And it is this realness, not the label of good or bad, that becomes the most genuine form of influence. Such a person doesn't need to teach morality. Their very eyes, gestures, presence each becomes a living teaching, without flaw. No one can live authentically if they are still afraid of losing their image. Any form of goodness controlled by fear or by the craving for approval is still just another performance, no matter how refined. And among all the performances, the good person is one of the hardest to let go of. Not because it is terrible, but because it is so widely celebrated. The ego knows very well how to hide inside what looks noble. And if one is not honest enough to shine the light inward, one can live an entire life inside a respectable framework without ever touching the living, whole essence of their true being. Escaping the role of the good person does not mean becoming ugly, selfish, or careless. On the contrary, it is the journey of peeling away the moral shells that were built up from comparison, expectation, and fear. When those shells fall away, a person does not lose their humanity. Instead, they begin to live as a true human being. A human being who can make mistakes, who can be weak, who can get angry, who can be incomplete, but who knows all of this without self-deception, without excuses, without embellishment. And it is precisely this honesty that forms the foundation of authentic morality. Only when one sees clearly that they once tried to be good merely to cover up the fear of rejection can they stop. Only when they recognize that their kindness was once fed by the need to be praised, to be loved, to feel safe, only then can they begin to live kindly without reason. This is the shift from conditioned behavior to unconditional presence. And such a shift cannot come from willpower or from ideals. It only comes from a direct seeing, a still seeing, a seeing free of defense. From that point onward, morality is no longer a duty, no longer a strategy, no longer something to impress others. It becomes as natural as breathing, as steady as a heartbeat, as effortless as a tree growing, without needing to prove to anyone that it is a tree. And in that simplicity, the human being returns to their original purity. They no longer need to be good. They no longer need to be anything at all. They simply are. When one lives like this, kindness is no longer confined by a framework of this is how it should be, or that is how it must look. It becomes soft, flexible, genuine. It might be a direct refusal. It might be a deep gaze into truth without avoidance. It might be a silence in the middle of noise. Kindness ceases to be an appearance and becomes a natural state where there is no manipulation of ego, no need to control others, no pressure to be loved. And at that point, we are no longer good people in the eyes of society. We are simply real human beings. No need to perform, no need to be accepted, no need to maintain an image. In that clarity, there is no ego, no role, no framework of morality. There is only a clean, living consciousness, seeing, feeling, experiencing, without the burden of any title. And in this way, morality is no longer a goal to achieve, but the natural expression of an unfragmented inner life. If today's reflection touched something in you, leave a thought below. Whether it's a question, a personal story, or a place where things still feel unclear, we always read, listen, and take time to respond in a separate video. May you stop running toward the light of others, and instead sit down with your own darkness, where the truest kindness is born.